Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Aaron Alter. I'm currently the Director of Product and Carrier Services here at SignalWire. I joined the amazing team here at SignalWire just under a year ago. It's been great so far. Prior to this, I served as the head of telecom at another company called Service Titan, which is the leading CRM servicing the home services industries, if anyone's ever heard of it. So let's get started with the most important topic of the day. Ideally, how do you make sure that your messages get delivered? So the way we'll start with this is kind of dividing things into two parts. The first part is toll-free numbers, because it operates a little bit differently, although there's a lot of overlap. And then we'll discuss and get into the long code numbers aspect of things. So first and foremost, when it comes to message delivery in general, you want to make sure that the content that's in your message is following the guidelines that are set forth by the mobile network operators, that's your wireless carriers, the CTIA, including their shaft rules. You can see the shaft content rules listed there. Just to point out in regards to shaft, the last one, tobacco, a lot of people get confused with that, is that cannabis, CBD related items, as far as right now, that is not officially allowed. With regards to the MNOs and the CTIA, that may very well change depending on how things go in the future. But right now, that content is currently not allowed. So just wanted to call that out with regards to shaft. Also, in general, with regards to disallowed content, so third-party loans, if you're going to run a campaign, anything like that, credit repair, debt relief, work from home, or similar type of campaign, lead generation that shares information with a third party. All of this stuff is, per their guidelines, is not really allowed. So again, just to highlight here, making sure that the content that's within your message is abiding by these guidelines and rules will ensure deliverability. That's kind of the first step. The next, just as important, is opt-in, opt-out, making sure that any end user you're going to message is opted in and that you are logging that. So whatever method you're using of logging an opt-in from your customer, making sure you're retaining that in a database. Sometimes if you run into an issue and we have to follow up with an MNO or one of our messaging providers, they'll actually ask for that. This customer said they had opt-in. Well, give us this message opted out. Can you show us where this customer opted in? Again, always good to make sure that you're retaining that and accepting that. And just as important, even if not more important, is to make sure you are listening to opt out. So if a customer did indeed opt in and then sends a message stop or cancel, you need to make sure you have kind of the technical and the plumbing in place to make sure that you're not continuing to message that end user. And I will add, one of the differences here specific to toll-free is that actually opt-out verbiage, the words opt-out, whether it's stop, cancel, or whatever term or method is related, is actually required to be in the message itself, specifically in regards to toll-free. The primary toll-free aggregator in the United States and Canada actually requires that. I will also add, if you have a reason why or some use case why it wouldn't make sense to put that in there or it can't be put in there, we can work. We have close relationships with the messaging providers and the MNOs to try and see if it makes sense, or we can make sure that you may not need to add that. But by default, with toll-free specifically, that verbiage is required. And again, I will highlight to make sure that you're following that. The reason is that the MNOs and messaging providers, literally the number one thing they actually track and follow are your opt-out rates. And if they start getting even maybe a 5 or a 6%, you could end up getting all of your messages blocked. So definitely something to be aware of and think about. The other one is, which is probably very familiar to a lot of people, is the idea of using more than one number for a campaign. Now, typically, as many of you know, the usual reason, or the many times people are doing this, to try to extend the throughput that they're getting. You're getting a certain amount of throughput, and I want to extend that. And so therefore, I'm going to get multiple numbers and then use those numbers to send messages at the same time to expand that. If that is your reasoning, that is not allowed. It is known as snowshoeing. And it's usually most of the time it's used to spam people. So it's frowned upon. However, there are use cases that we've come across where it is required. And it is a little strange on toll-free because there's no locality there as opposed to a loan code. But there are use cases where you would potentially require more than one number for your campaign. And in such a case, we do have the ability to go to our messaging aggregator with your information and the valid use case and see if we can get that approved. Moving on to loan code as far as differentiators, and most things are the same here. Again, still have to follow the content guidelines as mentioned, still need to make sure you're logging your opt-ins as they're received. And the one difference here is you don't need, as opposed to toll-free, although it is strongly suggested you use that, but including the actual opt-out verbiage in your messages is super important. But in regards to loan code, it's actually not 100% required. But again, they are monitoring your opt-out rates, and if your opt-out rates start to climb, you can run into an issue because that is heavily monitored. So just make sure, as a rule of thumb, it is best, even though it is not required on loan code, to still add it. And then the final thing, which we'll get into today, is this campaign registration and what that is. But essentially, loan code numbers going forward will require this registration process. Again, I do want to highlight before we move on here that toll-free in general, you need to abide by these guidelines. Of course, there's always exceptions to the rule, and rather than try to see if you can get your message through, what we always recommend is, if you feel that something may be borderline, work with us and we will work with you through our relationships just to make sure in advance that this is okay, or if I need to get an exception, it doesn't take too long to get that. We can actually work with you on getting that done, and we've seen a lot of success in that regard. So just something to keep in mind. I will take a pause here just to look at our chat real quick. Just I see some people are posting stuff, which is great here. Do we plan to release any bulk API for sending SMS? We do have, our API now allows you to send SMS in bulk, or our customers opt in to receive text and alerts, which is great. I'm not sure what the question is there. Is opt-out language suggested for transactional communication? Very good question. There is a very big difference in regards to informational versus kind of a marketing type message. If like I said before, if it doesn't make sense to add opt-out verbiage in your message because it is informational, maybe some restaurants have, like, they give you a temporary text and you can communicate that way so you can know when your reservation is there. It doesn't always require it. In those cases, and in general, specific to loan code, we can actually write that in the campaign for registration. I'll get into that. For toll-free specifically, as I mentioned, they require the verbiage, and therefore it would require pre-approval, which we can do for you if needed, and we've done before, but by default, it would be required. We'll get to some further later because I want to get through the rest here. So what actually is new and what's happening in the world of messaging? So let's start from the beginning here. This is all relating going forward to specifically to what's called loan code, or 10-digit loan code, or otherwise known as 10DLC. What is changing and what's happening? So if we take a little bit of a look, brief history, 10-digit loan code messaging was created back in the 90s, and it was primarily created for what's called P2P use cases. That means that I text you, that means I'm using my thumbs to type, and may be able to type really quick, and you're texting me back. It's more of a one-to-one transactional or conversational thing. It was not created for using mass messaging. And so that's one thing that's to understand, and that's why you kind of see up until this point that you've kind of had really low or much lower throughputs available on P2P. And that's, by the way, the only sanctioned path that's actually existed up until what we're going to discuss now. But as you guys are aware, with the expansion of technology and application platforms and the like, there's definitely a need for business type messaging, known as A2P, application to person messaging, which would require a much higher throughput than a one-to-one situation. However, as technology grew, they're still maintained this only P2P sanctioned path. So essentially what people were looking at doing, these businesses were starting, how do I communicate via message to my end users? And so they started to look at what the options that there were out there. So one they looked at were short code. Well, short code, while it does provide business type messaging at higher throughputs, there's a much longer process in getting approved for that. It could take up to 2 months sometimes, and the cost is really high. Toll-free. Well, toll-free does have higher throughput for its own reasons. However, toll-free doesn't provide locality. I may want to message somebody or have a campaign that shows locality. And so essentially, because of the low barrier to entry on P2P, businesses not having a sanctioned path for A2P over loan code decided to kind of work on ways to use business messaging through the P2P sanctioned path. And of course, because this was not created for that, it created problems. One is, as I mentioned before, this idea of using multiple numbers to higher your throughput, which ultimately led to people not sending appropriate material, spamming people, and things of this nature. And so essentially, there were really two problems that were kind of noticing by the MNOs. One was there's clear use case where we need to define a place where business messages can continue, while at the same time also finding a path to, while enabling that, to regulate those messages so that the real businesses with the real use cases are able to continue sending and at potentially higher throughput, while also, you know, putting a cap on anyone that's trying to spam or do things that are not correct, not proper. So how did this all roll out? So again, we discussed, first you need a sanctioned path. The MNOs all agreed on that, and then we need regulation. So as far as official sanctioned path, Verizon Wireless launched their A2P, their business messaging product, in February of last year. AT&T is about to launch that in just under a week, which we're going to talk about in a second. T-Mobile, Sprint is right behind them. We'll talk a little bit about that. The other MNOs that are out there, not only in the US, but also Canada and internationally, are also right behind them, as that all, again, the messaging industry in general agrees that there needs to be a sanctioned path for business and also regulated. So being that all of these MNOs are launching these products, it kind of gives a legitimate place for people to business message over a loan code. However, there's still an issue with regulation. How do I make sure that you know, nefarious things are not happening, people are not spamming, and that what is going across is legitimate? And so that essentially led to this thing called the Campaign Registry. So essentially, they agreed upon, this is the aggregators and the mobile network operators or wireless carriers agreed on one company that can be used to kind of verify businesses, their campaigns, and essentially all the operators within the ecosystem would all buy into this, connect with this centralized verification system and registry. And that would essentially create a way where the proper businesses, appropriate businesses, can continue to run and do things maybe that they were not able to do up until this point. While at the same time, things that were not verified or not appropriate or proper would essentially be, by default, be vetted out. So they selected this company called the Campaign Registry, which is a sub of a bigger company called Calera, which is an Italian-based cloud communications company. And as mentioned, this system, this registry, provides the mobile network operators with the visibility into who and what of each message campaign. So who's the company, the business, are they legitimate, and what are they sending? And obviously, it goes without saying that creating this centralized system benefits everyone in the ecosystem. It benefits the end users, as less spam is going on, and it also enables the businesses, such as yourselves, to actually potentially send at higher throughputs and also have a more comfortability in regards to being ensured that your messages will actually get delivered. And it's also worth pointing out that although many other vendors out there have kind of been a little bit reluctant, because it is a big change, there's no question of that, I've been reluctant to kind of get on board with this. Some, till as much as recently, SignalWire has actually been in communication with the Campaign Registry for almost 8 months now. Reason being, we recognized that there were issues going on, and we wanted to get on top of this and kind of sort through this as quickly as possible so that we are ready for you guys to make sure that you guys are successful here. And matter of fact, we've actually been registering customers on the registry as far back as 4 months ago. So we pride ourselves on making sure that your business is successful, and by always looking at ways that we can help do that, even sometimes if it seems like it might be against the grain. Moving on. So who's in this ecosystem? Who's involved? So just as mentioned, the mobile network operators aka the wireless carriers, they have direct binds built with this centralized registry. So when you register, they know who you are, they know what content you're likely to be sending, what your approval score is, and we'll get to that in a second as well. There's the DCAs. These are the providers that actually send your messages to the MNOs. So they're also integrated with this system. Then there's what's called the CSPs, the campaign service providers. That's the companies that provide you guys with messaging services. And so that's SignalWire. Then there's another layer called resellers, and some of you maybe fall into that bucket. A reseller is essentially someone that kind of resells the CSP's product. And so there are some nuances in regards to that. And then finally, there are brands. Brands equals the companies that actually send the messages to the end users. So again, all these components are all now going to be interconnected via this one central hub. So what are the requirements for registration? Who's required to register? What is required to be registered? So as mentioned, for now, registration is only needed in regards to people that are sending messages to AT&T or T-Mobile via long code numbers. So right now, as opposed to, for instance, if you're using toll-free or a dedicated short code right now, as of right now, that may very well change. As of right now, that is not required for registration. We get a common question people would like to know is this required outside of the USA? Essentially, if you're outside of the USA and plan on messaging an AT&T and T-Mobile long code number, or essentially you're going to have to register your number. So, but if you're messaging exclusively outside of the USA for now, registration is not required at this point in time. Also very important to again highlight here is that as of March 1st, we'll get into that in a second, but as of March 1st, anyone that does not register or does not take part in this kind of new setup will incur higher fees, that's per message, and they also risk their messages potentially getting completely blocked. So it is in everyone's best interest to go about registering. And like I said, we have that process in place and we can assist you with going through that process. What is the registration process? So let's kind of try to go through this as much detail as I can and what that entails. So step number one, as we mentioned, is we want to brand registration. So the most important thing is for the registry and the MNOs to identify who you are, who your business is. Are you a legitimate business? And part of that process requires providing your tax ID number, your EIN number, because again, the assumption is if you're a legitimate business, you're likely paying taxes. Even, by the way, internationally, we can put that information in as well so that we verify who you are. And then once you're doing that, then there's something called a campaign registration. So you're registering who you are, potentially who your customers are if you're a reseller, and then campaigns. So what is a campaign? There's a lot of variance here, a lot of questions around this, but a campaign equals a use case. So if you're essentially messaging people to alert them about something, and then you're also marketing something, so that's considered two separate use cases. So you need one campaign registration per use case. Part of registering, the registry actually asks, as we mentioned before, do you have an opt-in process? Do you have an opt-out process? There's also an area where you would provide sample content, sample text messages, where we could actually provide up to 5 samples, a minimum of 1 is required, where they could kind of see what type of message you are sending. Just to expand on this area a bit, for those that might be thinking, hey, maybe I just need one campaign or I'll fit everything in there, or what if I have a person-to-person use case and the messages are a little bit different? So the content is not 100%, it's only one piece of information that the MNOs are looking at amongst all the other pieces that are given in relation to your trust score, which we'll get to in a second. But essentially, the question is if you need to change your content, or when would I need to change my content? If the content you are changing to is a completely different use case, so you're going from alerting to marketing, you would need to then change your content or create a net new campaign. in order to do it. But essentially, just to highlight, campaign-specific registration is per specific use case, and the more use cases you have, the more campaigns you need. Trust scores. So as I mentioned, this main registry system is literally an entity that verifies legitimate versus non-legitimate. And based on certain bits of information, some of which you already discussed that you're giving through this registration process, there is basically a query ran, a verification ran by the registry, and it gives you essentially a score, a trust score. And that trust score will ultimately determine your ultimate messaging throughput limits on the MNO size, and we'll get to that in a second, what that looks like. One of the other concerns people might have is, what if the score that I get doesn't give me enough throughput for my business needs? What other recourse, if any, do I have? So the Campaign Registry has partnered with 3 partners in this regard. One of them actually has a built-in integration with the registry, where we could, for a one-time fee, it's not a large fee, we can actually apply for additional vetting for you through this third-party vendor, and you then have the opportunity to potentially get a higher throughput than was initially given to you by default. One of those vendors, as I mentioned, is integrated directly with the registry, and we have the ability to do that for you. There's a one-time $40 cost to do that, and any cost associated is taken one time, regardless of whether you actually get that additional vetting works. I do also want to call out, I know a lot of our customers do political type campaigns and messaging. So one of the vendors, one of the vetting vendors that are partnered with the registry is a company known as Campaign Verify. They are an entity that specifically is designated and works with people that need to, with businesses that need to do business political campaigns. And you can go directly to them. We actually have a link. I posted everything I'm discussing today, by the way, is on my blog. So we have all the links and all that information here. You can go to them, go through them, discuss with them exactly what your business case is. If approved through them, they will give you this actual token, which you could then give to us, and we could then put into the registry under your brand name, and that would heighten your throughput there. So if your default trust scores are a little bit lower, you have the ability to go through this kind of additional vetting process to potentially heighten that. Assigning numbers to campaigns. So as mentioned before, this concept of adding multiple numbers to a single campaign, if we look at it under the lens of long code registration, right? The question is always, why do you need to add more than one? Why can't you use one number for one campaign? Why are multiple needed? And again, if the typical reason is because I want to expand my throughput, well, that's no longer the case here, because you're now going to be able to get much higher throughputs or work through that vetting process to get higher throughputs off of a single number. That said, there are definitely use cases where a campaign would require more than one telephone number to be associated, right? We want to maybe advertise locality. I have customers in multiple states. It's the same campaign. I want to show locality if needed. If you have a legitimate case, there is an area within the registration process where we could tell the registry this campaign requires more than one number, and we could put in that detail, and then that will be put in place so that the MNOs are aware of this and know this. Again, if it's a legitimate case, you now have the opportunity to get that in there if needed. Again, to highlight, throughput, added throughput will be much higher per single number. So if the reason you're doing it is to higher throughput, it is no longer needed for that reason. Numbers match the campaign. So once you register with this campaign registry, essentially your numbers need to be matched up so that when you send a text message to one of the wireless carriers from that number, the wireless carrier knows that this is a registered number, who your brand is. You get a brand ID, a campaign ID, and that is done at the aggregator level. So we essentially take that information, and meaning your brand ID, after you get your company gets approved by the registry, your campaign ID or IDs, if given multiple, we then have your list of different numbers. We send that information over to the aggregator. They update what's called the OSR, which is basically this main registry where all messages flow through to the MNOs. And then that gets tacked on going forward to each of your messages. so that when the mobile network operator receives your message, that's there. It knows what you're approved for, what you're not approved for, and that's how it's able to tell what's legit, what's not, and so on and so forth. How long does registration take? So registration, from what we've seen, typically takes about 1 business day. So just to expand on that real quick, in the actual campaign registry, from what we've seen, 95% of the time, the second we hit the submit button, instantly you get approval. You get a brand ID and a campaign ID. Now, again, maybe your trust score may not be as high, which we can work through that, but the actual approval process, whether you're going to be approved or not, is instant. They created logics that do that verification electronically, and it is instantaneous. And then we have the second part, which is taking your brand ID, campaign ID, and associating it with your numbers so that when the MNOs get your message, it knows it's registered. That portion of things can take up to 1 business day. Right now, there's a lot of processing going on as everyone is looking to register. And to that end, we are currently working with both the campaign registry as well as our messaging providers and aggregators to automate this process. So you can expect that to be come your way shortly. We do definitely recognize that quick procurement of phone numbers is an essential need for many, many businesses, and we are working on getting that in place. Again, right now it is a manual process, which we've, again, been doing for 4 months now, pretty good. And we've seen a lot of success on that, but we are working towards that. How do you get started with this process? So we have an online form you could fill out. I will share that, and that's also in the blog post as well, where you could simply just fill in this information that's required. It instantly opens a ticket with our team, and our team immediately starts to get processing on that. So what is this? Let's talk a little bit about throughput and what that means, what this all means for throughput. So first of all, the higher throughputs, which I'll talk about in a second, that you get on loan code are not in place as of yet. So I repeat, currently the throughput that you're given on loan code is 1 message per second. And so that is still in place as of now. The higher throughputs we're going to discuss are not in place yet. Once they are in place, or until they are in place, what happens if you decide to send at a rate that is higher than your approved throughput? So SignalWire already had this in place up until this point. Essentially, our APIs allow you to send to us as quickly as possible, as much as possible. And we have essentially built a queuing system that queues up all of your messages, and then we send it out accordingly based on the throughput limits. And as this continues to expand, we will have those different approvals, which we're going to talk about right now, set on your account, on your campaigns accordingly, so that we know what you're approved for, so that we're sending out at that rate. Even if you choose to send at a higher rate, we have that ability, because we want to make sure that all of your messages are ultimately delivered. So here's a kind of a list and a layout. This is always changing, but this is kind of the lay of the land as far as where trust scores stand. We've seen a bulk of our customers end up during original vetting at the 2549 level. Again, it's all varies depending on what your campaign is, who your company is, and all of that. I do want to highlight some stuff here. So the way AT&T and T-Mobile, so AT&T has already confirmed this, but T-Mobile hasn't yet. This is likely what it's going to look like. But AT&T and T-Mobile have different ways that they're looking at throughput. So AT&T is more of how many, they give you an allowance of a message per second, or actually the way they refer to it as a text messages per minute, based on your approval score. So meaning there's no necessarily a daily limit. It's just you could send this amount, but it's got to be at this rate limit per second or per minute. T-Mobile, on the other hand, took a different path. They don't have essentially a per second or per minute limit. It's more of a daily limit. So you can send it as fast as you want, as much as you want, but you can only send up to 200,000 or whatever that is. So that's essentially one of the primary differences in regards to throughputs between AT&T and T-Mobile. Again, Verizon and some of the others, as they come down the pipe, remains to be seen how they'll handle this. And there can also be changes to this as well. This is all fairly new to everyone. Moving on, what is the cost of registration? So so let's actually divide this out into 2 different parts. There is the cost to register your brand and your campaigns with the registry. There is also another aspect of it, which is the network access fees that each carrier has by using their A2P 10 DLC product. So let's first go through the registration. So registering, as we mentioned before, requires you to register your business or your customer's business. So there is a one-time fee of $4, that is just one time, to register your brand for each brand that you're registering. In addition to that, there is a $10 monthly fee for each campaign that you have. Almost every campaign, except for charity, is a $10 a month fee per campaign. Again, there is no markup here. This is straight what the registry is charging. Essentially, this is their way of running this whole system with the MNOs and everyone else involved. Charities, again, a little bit lower. One point to also add here is that when we are signing you up in the registry, there's kind of it's like kind of in 3-month increments. So when you sign up for a campaign, it's every 3 months that it's active for. We auto activate it to continue the subscription beyond the 3 months, as we want to make sure you don't inadvertently get disrupted. So you can always tell us, hey, I want to stop this campaign. We'll go ahead and instantly we can turn that off. But just to ensure that in the future there's no additional fees or message blockage, we automatically select that the campaign will auto renew itself. Also really important to point out that because we do recognize that this is all new for everyone, we want to make sure that this process is as quick and as painless as possible. So SignalWire has decided that we, in regards to the cost of actual registration, this brand registration cost and the campaign registration cost, we are going to be paying those fees on your behalf up until April 30th. So please, please, please make sure to take advantage of this time to get all of your needed and associated campaigns that are needing of this registered. Moving on to the network or the carrier-related access fees. So I will not be sharing T-Mobile's today because T-Mobile's hasn't officially announced theirs. That will be coming up, and we will share that accordingly when we get it. As of right now, AT&T has released theirs. Again, these are going in place just under a week from today, March 1st. And super important to remember that any messaging campaign that is not registered by March 1st that requires registration will be paying a higher access fee per message starting March 1st. So that means that if you want to wait till a later point in time, maybe June, until the blockage, just be aware that there's going to be this added fee per message, which can definitely add up on top of your normal messaging rate. And so it's a 004 for unregistered SMS and a 005 for an MMS, a multimedia message. You could also see that by registering, most of our customers fit into one of these standard risk level campaigns here. And you could see how you're at least at minimum by registering going to have 003 on an SMS versus 004. So again, it's in everyone's best interest to get registered as quickly as possible, considering these timelines here. I do again want to highlight that these are pass-through fees. We make no money on that. It's just simply a pass-through. It's the same everywhere else, not specific to SignalWire. So what if you need to make changes? So let's just say you set everything up, everything is going, and you're good to go, but you need to make a change. So let's talk about that portion real quick. First of all, content. As we mentioned before, your content is based on use case. So as long as you're keeping your content within the original use case that you got approved for, you should be fine. If you're not sure, you should contact sales or support, and we can make sure that we're answering that for you. What if you actually do need to change your content? So I want to change my campaign. I want to add a new campaign. I want to change my campaign. It is very easy for us to do that. You could just simply send in a support ticket, put in this information, contact your sales representative with what that is. We have the ability literally to do that within minutes. Of course, we have a processing queue, but we can get that done very quickly. From a registry perspective, it is very fast to do that. If you need to add numbers, as mentioned before, where and when it makes sense, and if you have a valid use case for adding additional numbers to a campaign, it does not require additional approval. We have the ability to do that instantaneously as well. Again, keep in mind that you do need to have a valid use case for doing that, and it's not increasing your throughput. What about if you need to add a net new campaign? So net new campaign, as of right now, we also fairly quickly, it's going to be less than a day to do that. We essentially put this information into the registry. We then give this information to our aggregator, and they put that in place. You're looking at about 1 business day. Again, all of this, we are working on automating this in a very short term and near future, where this will all be automated, except if there's like a kickback, which will notify you of that as well. And we'll have APIs for this as well. Another question that's asked is, what if you need to switch providers? Or I'll even add to this, what if I want to use 2 providers at one time? So we'll talk about each one. So if you want to switch messaging providers, each messaging provider is its own CSP. It's its own campaign service provider. So we, SignalWire, have our own CSP ID, and then the brands are under that, the resellers are under that, and so on and so forth. So if you're switching to another vendor, you will need to essentially go through this process again. You'll need to give them your information, register your EIN. There's no concept, at least as of now, of porting that information over like you would a phone number. You would have to kind of apply net new under their umbrella CSP ID number. And the same concept applies as well for IDs, right? So if you want to use another vendor at the same time for messaging, the same time you're using SignalWire, you can do that as well. But you would have to apply separately for each corresponding number separately and appropriately as well. I do want to also add here that as some of you are probably wondering, there's a reseller aspect of this. Essentially, a reseller is someone that resells SignalWire services, and there's actually an option in the registry to connect resellers, and we could put that in, and you give us the sub brands and sub IDs, and we could put that in. If you need some more flexibility, you should definitely speak with our sales and our team on your needs going forward. There are some customers where there is a system and process where it can make sense for you to register as your own CSP, and there are some advantages to that, some negatives to that. However, what I will add is that there's a lot that's kind of behind the scenes that go on with integrating directly with the registry, and we're transparent about that. But because of the complexity, the goal is we want to keep it simple for you guys. So let us handle the kind of the dirty work, if you will, to make things simpler for you. But again, to that on the same token, if you feel that it makes more sense based on your unique business situation for you to register directly as your own CSP, there is a way that we can interconnect together in this ecosystem. So there is support for that. Moving on. So I do want to highlight, I'm actually proud to announce that we've actually, in regards to messaging, we've recently launched 2 new products here. I'll just go through them really quickly because we're running short on time and I want to get to your questions. But hosted messaging. So SignalWire now offers since February 5th the ability for us to host just the text messaging services on your number. This means that one, if you have your voice services and messaging services with another vendor, you have the ability to take that same number. We could host, SignalWire can host just the messaging portion of that number, while that same number is still with your current phone provider for voice services. So you don't need to tear all of that apart. I want to switch to SignalWire first for messaging. I don't want to tear my voice apart. I don't have a reason to do that, or I may want to do that later on. We now have the ability to just host the messaging portion while that remains with your current or your previous legacy provider. In addition to that, we also, if you're with, for instance, if you're using a plain old telephone service provider like AT&T Landline that doesn't allow for text messaging and just voice, we have the ability actually as well to enable messaging services on your landline number so that you can keep that number with AT&T or whatever landline provider is, and now have net new messaging services on that same number at the same time. Extremely beneficial for many use cases and many customers. You should definitely reach out to us to find out more about that one. In addition to that, we also launched, so we talked a lot about throughput today. This more is geared towards the higher throughput on toll-free. So toll-free, we give a throughput of about somewhere between 3 and 10 MPS. However, if you have a use case where you want to use 50 or 100, or maybe even more than that, please let us know. We have a system and process in place through our various messaging partners. We can get you approved for that. It's a fairly quick process to do that, and you can get started in no time in sending a high throughput over toll-free. And so we're officially actually launching that this Friday, the 26th. Although if you are interested in getting going now, we can definitely make that happen for you. So how do you get started? So most of you probably are already using SignalWire for messaging. For those that aren't, our messaging APIs are fully RESTful APIs. We support most common SDKs, JavaScript, PHP, whatever you're looking for. Sending a message is just via a simple REST call, and you could just use messages are received via webhooks. There's a link here for our messaging guides. Again, I will provide that as a follow-up to this LiveWire today. All right, so the way we'll do this is, I see that you guys, and thank you for that, you posted a ton of messages in the QA, so I'll try to go through those, and then we could take some questions verbally here, if there still are any, so just try to tackle them really quickly here. Is opt-out link, and I'll repeat the questions here, of course, so you guys know what we're referring to. Is opt-out language suggested for transactional communication? I think I addressed that earlier, that if you have a need for informational or have transactional, it's on loan code, it's recommended. On toll-free, it is required. If you need an exception, you can contact us and we can go through that process. If you have a valid use case, we can see if we can get that done. So this is a good question here. Some messaging that I do would be transactional and other messaging are marketing. Can you verify that they would be two different campaigns? And bonus question there is also, when can URLs be included? So good questions. So again, each use case, marketing is one campaign, another use case is there another. There are certain situations where you could do what's called a mixed campaign. However, we have seen where, so typically on marketing, sometimes you can get a lower throughput, where information you get a little bit higher. What I would say is we could work with you on that, but again, just the standard to answer the general question here, each separate use case would require two separate campaigns, and the general answer here is you would need two campaigns. In regards to URLs, I didn't mention this, but there is an area when we are registering you where if you do have URLs, we put that in, and that is actually in our submission form, where you can include that as well, and that is considered. So yes, you can include that, and that is needed. What about nonprofit organizations? Are they still being classified as business? Yes. So any organization, doesn't matter who you are, whatever EIN, whatever that ID is that you have, there's an area where we put that in place, but we need something to put in there. Just as a side note, some people have asked if they could put in, I don't have yet, I don't have an EIN, can I put in my social? We've tried that for a few customers, and it didn't seem to jive with the system well. So we would strongly recommend that you try to get an EIN number. Again, this is the idea. Just want to make sure that this is meant for business messaging, and if you are a business and legitimate one, you shouldn't likely have an EIN number or some form of tax ID. Does 10DLC only apply to loan codes sending messages from an auto dialer platform? So if regards to if you're sending messages via an automated system outbound, the 10DLC, so again, just to highlight here, 10DLC stands for 10-digit loan code, as opposed to short code, as opposed to toll-free. So any 10-digit loan code number, whether you're using an automated system to do that or some other way of doing it, even if you're using a P2P, a person-to-person use case, if you're going to be sending those loan code messages to AT&T and T-Mobile cell phones, you need to register that number with the Campaign Registry. Getting to the next one here, we are a SaaS provider, multi-tenant app supporting membership, provide SMS for our clients for announcements. These are not marketing messages. Will each client tenant have to be registered as a campaign? Will there be an API? I think I answered this question, but again, just to highlight, again, there's a reseller component there. There is a becoming your own CSP component there. So it depends on what your needs are for a business. I'll answer this question in general. Yes, each of your customers would require its own separate brand under your umbrella, whether that's done via a reseller or it's done because you integrate with CSP directly. I would say to reach out to our team directly so we could work with you in that. Will there be an API? As I mentioned, we are working diligently right now on providing an API for all of this, as it'll make sense for everyone in this ecosystem. So stay tuned for that. We currently monitor honor opt-out and log all messages will do great. Is the trust score applied to your entire business entity, or do you have a trust score for each campaign? So good question. Trust scores are applied per your business entity. However, there could be a variance. So each campaign has its, so I just want to describe this clearly. Your brand is essentially set with a certain trust score. That is one of the pieces that kind of factored into your ultimate throughput. So it could be different per campaign. So you can have an informational campaign that has one throughput, and you could have a marketing one that is approved for a different throughput. So it does take your trust score into account. So trust score plus informational equals one throughput for this campaign. Trust score plus marketing is another throughput for this campaign here. So it can vary on there. Yes, so it is more based, there's trust score is a factor and it's based on brand, but campaign is also a part of that equation as well. I'm interested in a specific use case that applies primarily to nonprofits and campaigns. So as I mentioned before, with regards to political, there's a company called Campaign Verify. We will send a follow-up link to them. That is also posted in my blog as well, with way and information how you could reach out to them to go through the process of getting that done if you're in the political arena. When you register your campaign and register your message copy, do you need to register if you change your message? Already addressed that. Again, if the content is similar to the use case or highlights the use case, you shouldn't have an issue. Can we prevent queued messages from being delivered outside of business hours? I'd have to take that one back. I'm not clear on what that specific meant there. If I think I know what you mean by that, I don't think we have a time-based system on our end where we would queue for a given time and then send the next business day. If there is a use case for that, we're always open to hearing different use cases based on business need. But right now, it's just a straight queue. So as you send
showing up to people at like 3 in the morning.
I'm sorry.
You don't want messages showing up to people at 3 in the morning.
Yes, correct. What I will say is our queuing mechanism is fairly fast. We don't have that in place yet. I do definitely hear that use case and what's there. And what I would say is to follow up with us on that, and we'll see what we can do in that regard. I'm not aware that we have that ability currently. I could be wrong though. If not, we'll look into potentially adding it if it makes sense.
Yeah.
Or also.
Just to add to that, I think that that's really relevant, especially given the limits on T-Mobile, where they're capping it at like 40,000 or 200,000 a day, because there's no knowledge of like once it's capped at midnight, are they going to send those messages? So that's a definite concern.
Duly noted. We will follow up with that. I'll follow up with my engineering team on that. It totally makes sense, and we'll see what we can do in that regard, if we don't already have the plumbing for that. Let's see, just to get to anything else here. What about if we use loan codes for voice patch throughs? Again, if it's loan code messaging to AT&T or T-Mobile for now, it's going to require registration. Let's get to some of the stuff in the bottom here. For low volume customers, 100 messages a month, do they require registration as well? Same fee structure, yes and yes. We have small groups and a low cost tiers for these small groups, adding $10 a month just so they can send a handful of whether our monthly meeting cancel messages will make add-on features somewhat unpalatable. So again, I will highlight here, obviously these new fees are can be viewed as excessive in some ways, and it is an impact for everyone involved there. But what I will add is these are industry M&O related fees, and we're just simply passing those through. And as again, the whole industry is doing at this point. So I 100% feel for that, and maybe those fees will get lower over time. But as of now, those are just simple pass-throughs and requirements that are set forth by the M&Os that you're trying to send the messages to. Can you use the same numbers for different campaigns? Address this. A good question. Jim got a lot of the good questions today. Everyone has great questions. Can you use the same number for different campaigns? If there is, technically speaking, I think from what I've heard, no, you really would have to have a different number there. If there's a use case for that, I think there's a way we could potentially work with that and make that happen, but we'd have to understand what that is and work with that. But in general, it's, I believe it's one, you cannot have multiple members on multiple campaigns, the same number on multiple campaigns. If we are planning for a survey campaign, are there any webhooks available to receive customers' feedback? So based on reply, we can send a message. I'd have to check with our engineering team on that one there, and we'll send a follow-up in that regard. To Rob, duly noted. Yeah. And again, just to address again on that, as far as the pricing and additional costs, we totally get it. Of course, it's an impact to everyone in the industry and the business. But we, again, at the same point, we're just kind of in kind of the playing field, and we need to make sure that you guys are covered and in the best way possible. So those are basically the questions I've read off the chat. If anyone wants to ask anything, feel free to ask away here. So we're just running that raffle to see who our gift card winner is. I'll take Rob's question while we're waiting on that. Who can we contact to clarify this further? So your sales rep, I would say to start with your sales rep. If you're not on the registry yet, you can set up a call to discuss your specific detail to make sure that you and your business needs are taken care of. And what I will promise you is that we will work with you to make sure that you're successful and that's done. We have, as I mentioned, very strong relationships with all the players in this field, and we've seen tremendous success in going through this process properly. So reach out to whoever your sales rep is, and they will work with the rest of our team in making sure that if you have something unique that needs to be considered, that we'll work with you in making sure that gets done. Are there any other questions? And speaking of which, Jim Hensel, you are the winner of our QA gift card. So congratulations to you. We'll send you a follow-up with that detail. Just to sum up, again, thanks everyone for taking the time. I know that this is a lot of information here to take in at once. We're going to send a follow-up with all the links that we discussed, the blog, and any related information. If you have any further questions, we want to hear from you. Reach out to your sales rep accordingly, and we will work with you on this. With that said, again, thanks again for your guys' time, and we look forward to seeing you in the next LiveWire.